I still remember the way the attorney's voice tightened, as though even he couldn't believe the words he was about to speak aloud. We were sitting in a narrow conference room in downtown Savannah, sunlight slanting across a stack of leather-bound folders that smelled faintly of age and dust. My hands rested quietly in my lap. I had come expecting routine paperwork. Maybe a few final documents related to the settlement of my grandfather's estate. Nothing more. But then the attorney pushed a single envelope toward me. Heavy. Cream-colored. My name written in my grandfather's careful cursive. Your grandfather, he said, clearing his throat, set aside a fund for you. Something private. Separate from the rest of the estate. He paused. Hesitated. Adjusted his glasses as though that might make this moment more real. It has matured significantly over the years. Another pause. Mrs. Harrison, it's now valued at $3.1 million. The words didn't register at first. 3.1 million. No one in my family had that kind of money. My grandfather had lived modestly, a retired machinist with a quiet life, a small home, and a stubborn loyalty to frugality. He patched his own shirts and fixed his own roof even when he was well into his 80s. So how could he possibly have left me a fortune? My breath caught, and I felt my pulse hammer in my throat. A strange combination of awe, disbelief, and something colder, something instinctive, flooded through me. Because I already knew my family. And I knew exactly what $3.1 million would do to them. The attorney slid the envelope closer. He wanted you to have this privately, before we handle the larger estate matters. Privately. That one word chilled me. Because I could already sense the storm that would follow. I just didn't yet know how far they had already gone. How much they had already taken. Or how deep the betrayal would cut. The envelope sat between us, waiting. Waiting for me to open it. Waiting for the truth inside. I reached for it, fingertips brushing the seal. And just as I did, the attorney said something that froze me completely. Your grandfather instructed me to warn you. He feared someone might try to take this from you. I looked up sharply. Who? I whispered. He didn't answer immediately. He simply slid another file toward me, thicker, heavier, locked with a metal clasp. Inside it was the beginning of a truth I was not prepared to face. A truth about my own family. And the moment I opened it, everything I thought I knew about loyalty, inheritance, and blood itself would begin to unravel. My name is Margaret Louise Harrison, though most folks call me Maggie. I am 65 years old, widowed, semi-retired, and until that afternoon in the attorney's office, I believed I understood where my life was headed. Quietly, steadily, predictably. I had spent decades as a high school librarian. I loved the smell of old books, the hush of polished floors, the subtle mischief in students' eyes when they thought I didn't notice. It was a calm life. A small life, perhaps, but one I had never resented. My husband, Robert, died 7 years ago, and with him went the last spark of adventure I had known. I filled the silence with gardening, volunteer work, gentle routines. And my grandfather, well, he had been my anchor. The one person who looked at me and saw not a widow, not a quiet librarian, not a woman fading into the background, but someone still capable of meaning. Someone still worth investing in. He was 93 when he passed, sharp until the last week. I had visited him nearly every weekend, bringing peach cobbler or helping him sort through tools in his shed. He always patted my hand and said, "You're the one who understands, Maggie. You're the one who keeps things steady." I never knew what he meant by that. Now, sitting with the envelope he left me, I began to wonder if he had been preparing me for something all along. As the attorney waited, I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, 2 pages, folded neatly, written in his steady pen. My Maggie, if you're reading this, then the time has come. What I set aside is yours. Not because you asked, but because you've earned it through honesty, through loyalty, through the way you've lived your life. But I need you to be cautious. You must not trust everyone who shares our blood. My stomach tightened. There are things I was never able to tell you in person. Things I discovered too late. People who took advantage of me, and may try to do the same to you. I stopped reading, breath shaky. Someone had taken advantage of him? Who? When? How? And why hadn't he told me? The letter ended on a line that made my skin prickle. Protect yourself, Maggie. Protect what is yours. There are documents in the file that will explain everything, including what was stolen from me. Stolen. The word echoed in my mind. I looked at the attorney. What documents? He tapped the metal-clasped folder. These. I placed my hand on the folder, feeling its weight. A weight that already felt personal, intimate, dangerous. I wasn't prepared for what I was about to uncover, but I opened the folder anyway. And what I found inside changed everything. To understand the depth of what happened, you need to know my family, at least the parts of it that mattered to my grandfather. My mother, Elaine, was his only daughter, a woman with a sharp tongue and an even sharper obsession with appearances. My brother, Todd, was always her golden child. Handsome, charming, and utterly irresponsible, he floated from job to job, woman to woman, scheme to scheme. Somehow he always landed on his feet, usually because someone else cushioned the fall. And then there was me. Quiet, stable, predictable Maggie. To them, I was the helper, the sitter, the errand runner, the one who always said yes when no one else wanted the burden. Even when I didn't say yes, they assumed it of me. After my grandfather grew older, my mother and brother began circling him like vultures, though at the time I dismissed it as an exaggeration of my own frustration. They visited more often, brought home-cooked meals, offered to manage paperwork. I remember thinking, maybe they've changed. Maybe they finally appreciate him. But Grandpa once pulled me aside, his voice low. Your mother and Todd. They ask too many questions about my accounts. About my house. About the land. I told him to set boundaries. That he didn't owe anyone financial explanations. He nodded, but there was a shadow in his eyes I didn't fully understand. Now, sifting through the documents in the attorney's folder, I realized that shadow had been justified. Inside were copies of withdrawals, authorizations, signatures that did not match his handwriting. Transactions from months when he'd been hospitalized. Wire transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. Insurance changes. Property reassignment forms. My heartbeat quickened. At the bottom of the stack was a document showing the sale of a small plot of land Grandpa had always refused to part with. The land where he and my grandmother had first built their lives together. Sold. Without his knowledge. Transferred into a joint account under my mother's and brother's names. A twisting nausea rolled through me. Had they really done this? Had they stolen from him? From a man who trusted them, who had never denied them anything. My hands trembled as I turned another page. A timeline. Notes. Statements. A private investigator's summary, commissioned by my grandfather. He had known. He had suspected, then confirmed it. But he hadn't confronted them. Instead, he had quietly gathered evidence and left it to me. Why me? Why put this burden in my lap? The answer was written in the margin of one of his notes. Maggie is the only one who won't be blinded by love or greed. The betrayal was no longer abstract. It had shape, weight, names. My mother, my brother, the people who were supposed to protect him, the people who were now waiting eagerly, oh so eagerly, for the reading of the rest of the will. If they had already stolen from him before he died, what would they do when they learned he'd left me a private fortune? And then another thought struck me, cold and sharp. What if they already suspected? The realization hit me like a warning bell. Because that would mean one thing. They wouldn't stop at what they had already taken. And I would need to be ready. The first sign that something was deeply wrong came 3 days after I left the attorney's office. I hadn't told anyone about the fund, not my daughter, not my closest friend, certainly not my family. The attorney advised silence until we completed the probate process. And I agreed. But silence did not protect me the way I hoped it would. I received a call from my mother. "Maggie," she said, her voice dripping with false casualness, "your grandfather mentioned something before he passed. Something about setting up a little something for you." My heart slammed against my ribs. "How would you know that?" "Oh, he told me," she lied easily. "He didn't want you to worry about your future. Thought you could use a safety net." Her phrasing sharpened my attention. Safety net. The exact term my grandfather used in his letter. A phrase he rarely used with anyone else. My mother wasn't guessing. She knew. "How much was it?" she asked too quickly. "Just curious." I swallowed. "I haven't received anything." A short silence stretched. Thin. Dangerous. "Well," she finally said, "I hope you keep in mind that Todd and I did everything for your grandfather. Everything. We deserve some recognition. You weren't the only one in his life." A chill passed down my spine. This wasn't about recognition. This was about money. About what they thought they were owed. They had stolen from him once. They were circling again, hungry, entitled, emboldened. And they weren't even hiding it. Later that evening, I drove to my grandfather's house to pick up a few personal items I wanted before the estate sale. The house felt strangely hollow without him. Quiet in a way that made the air almost thick. Dust motes drifted in the golden light, and the old wooden floors creaked under each step. I went to the study first. His desk was exactly as he had kept it, but as I opened the drawers one by one, I made an unsettling discovery. Documents were missing. Key documents. Files I distinctly remembered seeing weeks before. Property appraisals, bank statements, a handwritten ledger he kept meticulously. Gone. Someone had been here. Someone who knew what to look for. My brother's truck was unmistakable. It had been parked in the driveway earlier that day. He must have let himself in. He had a key. I stared at the empty drawer, my breath thin. They weren't waiting for the will reading. They were already moving. Already searching. Already destroying. My grandfather's warning pulsed through my mind. Protect yourself, Maggie. Protect what is yours. But suddenly this wasn't only about protecting myself. This was about uncovering the full truth of what they had already done. And I wasn't even close to the end of it. Because the very next morning, the attorney called. His voice was tight. Uneasy. "We have a problem," he said. "A problem that would reveal the depth of their betrayal. A problem that would force me into a fight I never wanted. A problem that would change everything." The attorney's words replayed in my mind as I drove to his office that morning. "We have a problem." It turned out the problem was this. Someone had filed a challenge to the will. An accusation that my grandfather had been mentally unfit in his final months, that certain decisions he made were suspect, that beneficiaries had undue influence. The challenger? My mother. Supported by my brother. The attorney handed me a printed copy of their petition. My mother had signed it boldly, her neat cursive looping with faux elegance. Todd's signature appeared below in his messy scrawl. The accusations were infuriating. That I manipulated my grandfather. That he was confused and vulnerable. That his private bequest to me was inconsistent with family expectations. The same family that had stolen from him. My jaw clenched. The attorney leaned forward. "Their claim won't hold if we present the full evidence your grandfather left behind. But they don't know we have that evidence. They think you came in empty-handed. So they're trying to steal more. They're trying to take everything." I sat back, the reality sharp and cold. My mother and brother weren't content with what they had already taken. They wanted the rest. They wanted my share. They wanted to erase my grandfather's last act of trust. I opened the metal-clasped folder again, this time with more intention. We laid out each piece of evidence. A forged signatures on withdrawal slips, a unauthorized wire transfers, or a falsified property reassignment, or a private investigator's report documenting their visits to his bank, or a recorded interview with my grandfather confirming he felt pressured. But there was one document I hadn't noticed before. A sealed letter addressed to the attorney, marked only open if necessary. He broke the seal while I watched. Inside was a notarized statement written by my grandfather himself. A declaration of mental competence. A timeline of events. A description of the misconduct he suspected from my mother and brother. And at the bottom, his signature, bold, determined, steady. Mrs. Harrison, the attorney said quietly, this is irrefutable. Relief washed through me. But only for a moment. Because as we continued sorting the documents, his expression shifted again. Have you noticed any missing items at your grandfather's house? He asked. I hesitated. Yes. Some files. He nodded grimly. We believe they're trying to destroy evidence. They may have taken more than you realize. That struck something deep. My grandfather had trusted me with the truth, and they were trying to erase it. But the investigation wasn't done yet. Over the next week, I worked with the attorney and a forensic accountant. We traced transactions. We documented signatures. We gathered statements from neighbors who had seen my mother and brother visiting the house at odd hours. Every new detail painted a clearer picture of deliberate manipulation, deliberate theft, deliberate betrayal. But it was the last discovery that chilled me the most. The forensic accountant found an account, jointly held by my mother and brother, that matched the missing funds exactly. This wasn't coincidence. This was calculated. And it meant only one thing. They believed the money was theirs. They believed they could outsmart me. They believed I would back down quietly. But they didn't know who they were dealing with. Because I had something they didn't. The truth. And the courage to use it. Still, I wasn't ready for what came next. Because just as we finalized our evidence, the accountant looked up with a frown. There's one more transaction you need to see. One that involves your name. My stomach dropped. What did they do? I whispered. He slid the document toward me. And when I saw it, I knew this fight was about to become personal in a way I had never anticipated. The document showed something I never expected, a recent attempt, filed secretly by my mother and brother, to petition for control of the private fund my grandfather left me. They had no legal grounds, of course, but that didn't stop them. Their claim stated that I was emotionally unstable, following my husband's death. That I was financially irresponsible. That a large inheritance would be unsafe in my hands. It was slander. Calculated. Cruel. And it was the moment something inside me hardened. I had spent my whole life avoiding conflict. Playing the peacekeeper. Keeping family harmony, even when it came at my own expense. But this was different. This wasn't petty drama or emotional manipulation. This was theft. Fraud. Deception. And a direct attack on my integrity. I felt something rise inside me. Slow, steady, ancient. A resolve I hadn't touched in years. I could hear my grandfather's voice as clearly as if he was sitting beside me. Maggie, you keep things steady. You do what's right, even when others don't. That's why I trust you. And suddenly the path before me was sharp, defined, undeniable. I would fight. Not with shouting. Not with vengeance. But with the truth. Ethical, documented, irrefutable truth. The attorney and I prepared a response. We assembled every piece of evidence. We drafted statements. We organized files, recordings, documents. We built a case so solid they wouldn't know where the cracks began. But the turning point wasn't the legal strategy. It was what I did next. I called my mother. Maggie, she said, feigning warmth. We're all under so much stress with the will. Let's just keep things calm. Calm. I repeated softly. Is that what you were thinking when you filed a petition claiming I'm mentally unstable? The silence on the line was electric. "I don't know what you're talking about," she snapped. But the tremor in her voice told me everything. "You stole from Grandpa," I continued. "You forged documents. You sold his land. And now you're trying to take what he left me." "Maggie." "It's over," I said. "I know everything." A sharp inhale. Then a click. She hung up on me. But that was all right. Because the next step wasn't a conversation. It was confrontation. Calm, public, undeniable confrontation. The kind that leaves no room to hide. We scheduled the probate hearing. My mother and brother arrived confident, smug, certain they could intimidate me into surrender. But they didn't know the evidence I held. They didn't know the witnesses prepared to testify. They didn't know the private investigator would be present. They didn't know my grandfather had left a final statement, a legal shield forged in truth. And they certainly didn't know I was no longer afraid of them. As I took my seat in the courtroom, hands steady, back straight, I felt something profound settle inside me. This was no longer about inheritance. This was about justice. For my grandfather. For myself. The judge entered. The hearing began. And I knew without doubt that my family's downfall would begin right here. But I didn't yet realize just how dramatic and silent that downfall would be. The turning point of the hearing came sooner than anyone expected. My mother's attorney opened with confidence, spinning a narrative of manipulation, mental decline, and familial concern. My mother dabbed at imaginary tears. Todd played the role of the wounded son, shaking his head solemnly. I watched quietly. Then it was our turn. My attorney began with the notarized declaration my grandfather had left. The judge read it carefully, eyebrows knitting as he reached the section detailing my mother and brother's pressures and financial intrusions. My mother's complexion shifted from pink to ashen. We presented the forged signatures next. Then the bank withdrawals. The wire transfers. The property reassignment. The investigator's report. Witness testimonies. The timeline. Each piece clicked into place like interlocking gears. And then came the final blow. The forensic accountant explained the recovered financial trail, the one leading directly to a joint account belonging to my mother and brother, containing the exact sum missing from my grandfather's holdings. The courtroom went still. Todd's leg began bouncing violently. My mother stared ahead, stone-like, refusing to meet my eyes. They didn't need handcuffs for their downfall. They didn't need shouting, scandal, or spectacle. Their downfall was quiet, deliberate, inevitable. The judge spoke evenly, without emotion. There is clear evidence of financial misconduct, fraudulent transfers, and undue interference with the decedent's assets. The petition to challenge the will is denied. Furthermore, I am ordering a full investigation into potential criminal actions. My mother swayed in her chair. Todd cursed under his breath. But I remained still. Poetic justice isn't loud. It is silent, sharp, exact. By the time we left the courthouse, the consequences had already begun. Their accounts were frozen. Their access to the estate revoked. Their credibility shattered. Their reputations quietly dismantled among relatives and community alike. They had walked into that courtroom believing they would strip me of what was mine. Instead, they lost everything they had stolen, and more. As we exited the courthouse, Todd rushed after me. "This isn't over," he hissed. "We're family." I turned to him, calm, collected. "Exactly," I said. "Which is why it should have never come to this." He had no response. My mother wouldn't even look at me. Their destruction wasn't thunderous. It was the quiet collapse of a house built on deceit. And there was still one more consequence they didn't yet know about. Grandpa had written an addendum, one the attorney handed to the court that day. A clause stating that any heir who attempted to contest the will or undermine another beneficiary would automatically forfeit their share. My mother and brother had undone themselves. Silently. Completely. Permanently. In the weeks that followed, Life settled into something quieter, gentler. The storm had passed, though its echoes lingered in small, unexpected places. My mother stopped calling entirely. Todd moved out of state, apparently chasing another doomed business venture. For the first time in my life, the distance felt less like abandonment and more like relief. The estate finalized smoothly. My grandfather's home went to charity, just as he wanted. His workshop tools were donated to a vocational program. Every detail of his life found a dignified place to rest. And then there was the fund. $3.1 million. A number that still felt surreal each time I saw it printed in black ink. I didn't spend it at first. Not out of fear, but out of reverence. My grandfather had left it for me, not as a prize, but as a safeguard. A second chance. A life raft. One evening, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea and reread his letter. Use it wisely, Maggie. Use it to protect your peace. Use it to build something that lasts. I cried, not out of sadness, but out of gratitude. His faith in me stretched beyond his lifetime, leaving threads of strength woven into my days. I finally allowed myself to imagine a different kind of future. Still quiet, still gentle, but filled with choices I had never allowed myself to consider. I paid off my mortgage. I renovated my small sunroom into a reading nook. I set up a scholarship fund in his name for students pursuing trade professions. I even took a solo trip to the Blue Ridge Mountains, a place he used to tell stories about. Standing at the overlook, crisp wind brushing my cheeks, I whispered, "Thank you, Grandpa. I hope I did right by you." In the peaceful stretches of my days, I realized something profound. Justice doesn't heal everything, but it clears the ground so healing can finally grow. The anger faded. The betrayal loosened its grip. And in its place came something sturdier than forgiveness: clarity. I understood my mother and brother in a way I never had before. Their choices were reflections of their fears, their insecurities, their desperation. But their flaws no longer dictated my life. I had my peace. I had my truth. And I had the legacy of a man who believed in me when no one else did. Little did I know, however, that the story wasn't entirely finished. Because one afternoon the attorney called again. "There's one final document we haven't discussed yet," he said gently. "Your grandfather left you a note regarding your mother." A note I had never seen. A note that contained his final piece of wisdom. A note that would shape the ending of this story. The final note from my grandfather was surprisingly short. Written on a single index card, tucked into an envelope the attorney had overlooked until the last review. It read, "Maggie, do not waste your life trying to clean what others have chosen to soil. Protect your peace, not their comfort. Let the truth stand on its own. Its weight is enough. Love, Grandpa." I read it twice. Then a third time. Those words settled over me like a warm quilt. Firm, comforting, grounding. All my life, I had been the one who tried to soothe tensions, fix fractures, soften sharp edges. But some edges are meant to stay sharp. Some lines are meant to be drawn, not blurred. Grandpa understood that before I ever did. And that became the moral of this entire journey. Truth doesn't need anger to be powerful. Justice doesn't need cruelty to be complete. And revenge, when rooted in integrity, is simply the restoration of what was never theirs to take. My mother and brother faced the consequences of their choices. Not because I sought to punish them, but because truth has a way of revealing itself, piece by piece, until it stands undeniable. As for me, I rebuilt my life not with bitterness, but with intention. I honored my grandfather through the way I chose to live, with steadiness, with dignity, with quiet strength. And in doing so, I realized something worth sharing with anyone who has ever faced betrayal from their own blood. Family is defined not by who shares your name, but by who shares your integrity. Loyalty without honesty is manipulation. And peace earned through truth is the most lasting peace of all. So here I stand, 65, wiser than I ever expected to be, grateful for the journey even with its jagged edges. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. Protect your peace. Honor your truth. And never underestimate the legacy of someone who believed in you quietly, steadfastly, completely. Their faith can change the entire course of your life. It certainly changed mine.